tragically, have died as a result of these heinous crimes. I very much hope that it will encourage all of us.
It happened in a single, breath-stealing moment, but it changed everything. Laura, Camilla's daughter, stood across the room from Princess Anne, and then it came. A cold, piercing death stare. One look, so powerful it sent a message sharper than any words could carry. It was like watching a storm building behind her eyes, slow and unstoppable. Someone whispered, almost afraid to breathe. Hours later, royal staff received orders. Laura's royal roll was to be removed immediately. No questions asked. What had Anne seen in that stare? Why had the palace reacted so swiftly? What secret war had finally reached the surface? The answer lay in a look that should never have been witnessed, a glance that shattered centuries of silence. The grand ballroom of Buckingham Palace glittered under 100 golden lights. Silver trays glided smoothly through the crowd, glasses clinking gently, music drifting like a sigh through the air. It was one of those perfect royal nights where every detail mattered and appearances ruled everything. But behind those polished smiles, something was boiling. And tonight, the storm did not arrive in words. It arrived in a single look. Cameras were everywhere. Flashes burst like fireflies, freezing stiff smiles, glinting gowns, and shining medals beneath the chandeliers. Guests watched in quiet fascination as the House of Windsor presented itself, polished and poised as ever. Queen Camilla stood near King Charles, calm and collected. Prince William and Princess Kate, side by side, offered warm nods and cautious waves. Then, quietly but with purpose, Laura Lopes, Camilla's daughter, entered the room. She wasn't meant to stand out, but she did. Grace became her armor as she moved with quiet defiance. Her gaze swept the crowd before locking suddenly, fiercely, onto one woman, Princess Anne. For a heartbeat, the palace seemed to freeze. Chatter died. Music blurred into white noise. Laura's eyes met Anne's, and the softness of the evening drained from the air. The look wasn't loud. It wasn't a show. It was deadly. A quiet, sharp fury burned in those eyes. Laura's face remained calm, composed, unmistakably powerful. Her jaw didn't move. Her lips didn't speak, but her gaze carried everything. Across the room, the message hit. Princess Anne blinked slowly, not in fear, but in disbelief. For decades, she had ruled the royal scene with quiet discipline, unshaken by noise or challenge. But this was different. This wasn't a passing glance or a casual slip. This was a deliberate message. Tension spread like perfume, and aides near the walls exchanged quick, tense looks. Prince William's smile faltered. Kate shifted, brushing her gown. Even Camilla, usually unreadable, turned almost imperceptibly, sensing something shift in the air. The press did not miss it. One lucky, sharp camera captured the moment in perfect clarity. Laura's glare, Anne's pause, the invisible chill between them. By morning, the image would be everywhere. Nobody spoke that night, but everyone felt it. The atmosphere had shifted, like the wind turning before a storm. Laura turned away after a few seconds, her face unreadable, slipping back into the crowd. But the damage had been done. In a palace where silence is tradition and feelings buried beneath duty, that one look cracked something wide open. She looked at Anne as if she did not belong. One guest whispered behind a fan, "No." She seemed to dare Anne to voice it aloud. Another murmured. Noting Anne didn't react, she stood her ground, hands clasped in front, spine stiffened with steel. She had faced challenges before, but never this close. Never from Camilla's daughter and Camilla herself. Anne said nothing. Not to Laura, not aloud at all. She sipped her glass, lips tight, eyes distant. But inside, she must have felt it. The shift. The quiet threat wrapped in a moment. It wasn't just a stare. It was a declaration, a warning, a challenge from someone outside the royal circle to the woman at its very heart. And everyone knew consequences would follow. Not that night, not in the ballroom, but soon. In the royal world, wars don't always begin with words. Sometimes they begin with a single look, a silent dare, a death stare. And this one would be remembered forever. And this was only the beginning. Long before the glare caught the world's attention, the story had already been unfolding, woven in silence, built over years of distance, shaped by cold stares behind palace walls. It wasn't sudden, it wasn't loud, it had been growing quietly all along, like a crack in marble, unseen, but inevitable. Princess Anne, the marble princess, only daughter of Queen Elizabeth II, had always worn her crown with pride. Not one of jewels, but an invisible crown of duty. She was unshakable, the firm hand, the royal who never asked for attention but commanded it simply by being. She spent her life serving the crown, stoic, precise, unbending to scandal or sentiment. For Anne, tradition was sacred. Anything that shook it was a threat. She rarely spoke, but her silence always carried meaning. Camilla Parker Bowles had a complicated past, once dismissed as the other woman. She quietly endured cold shoulders, whispered judgments, and headlines that refused to forget, but she remained. When the day came that she became queen consort, many were not ready to accept it. Anne wasn't ready either. Their relationship was never close. Polite greetings at events, shared spaces at family gatherings, but never warmth. Anne did not fight for approval. She protected her position. In the middle of that quiet war stood Laura Lopes, Camilla's daughter by blood, but never a royal by name. She grew up in shadows, close enough to see the crown, far enough to never touch it. No palaces, no balcony waves, but the royal world was always just a room away, a voice down the hall, a photograph in the paper. Laura watched from the sidelines. As a child, she admired Princess Anne, seeing her as strong, fearless, important, but admiration slowly faded. Smiles grew thinner, greetings became nods, then nothing at all. At family events, Laura would walk in behind Camilla, composed, ready to belong, but Anne barely noticed. At one Christmas gathering, Laura offered a warm, "Merry Christmas, Ma'am," and continued walking. Anne's only reply, a tight nod and a glance at the tree. That moment stayed like a bruise. Other moments followed. A dinner at Clarence's house, her name missing from seating charts, stepping away mid-conversation at charity events. Each silence felt like a message. You are not one of us. Camilla noticed and tried to ease the distance, to invite Anne into warmth, but the cold never thawed. She once told Laura gently, "Give her time," but time only widened the gap. Laura never spoke of it. Not to the press, not even to Camilla, but something inside her hardened. She learned to walk into royal rooms head high, heart armoured, expecting no warmth. She watched, she waited, she remembered. Anne, loyal to the crown, never made space for outsiders. Duty came first. Outsiders, no matter how close, stayed outsiders. And so it went year after year. Greetings ignored, events attended but never welcomed, until one day Laura stopped trying. She did not frown, she did not complain, but her smile disappeared, replaced by something else, something quieter, stronger, sharper. That look, which would stun Buckingham Palace years later amid flashing lights and cameras, wasn't born in a moment. It was born from a lifetime of being overlooked. The glance that shocked the palace had a history of slights, silence, and a throne that never made room for her. She was the outsider's daughter, and she was done being invisible. The conversation that changed everything. The room was quiet, far too quiet for a royal meeting. No press, no cameras, just velvet chairs, polished floors, lowered voices, not out of respect, but tension. A fireplace flickered faintly in the corner, but there was no warmth in the air. Princess Anne sat with her usual stiff posture, arms folded tightly, her face unreadable across from her queen. Camilla sat softer, quieter, but her gaze stayed steady, hinting she already knew what was coming. Anne cleared her throat. "There's something we need to speak about." She chose her words carefully. "It's regarding Laura." Camilla didn't blink. "What about her?" she said, calm but firm. "She's been making quite a few appearances lately," Anne continued. "Charity events, gallery openings, even church services with the family, public ones. Cameras see everything. She's helping where she can," Camilla replied gently. "She's not doing anything wrong." Anne's fingers tapped once against the armrest. "She's not a working royal." The words fell between them like ice striking glass. "She doesn't hold a title. Anne continued, and she doesn't represent the crown, yet lately she's acting as if she does. Camilla pressed her lips together, composed but firm. Laura was born into this life, Camilla said softly. She didn't ask for it. She's never caused trouble. She shows respect. She's not one of us, Anne said flatly. Camilla's eyes darkened ever so slightly. She is my daughter. That's why it's harder. Not easier. The monarchy survives because it stays small, focused, blood-bound. The firm must remain tight, controlled, clean. If we bend the lines, people push them, and then we have no lines at all. Camilla leaned forward, her tone steady but firm. Laura doesn't want a throne. She doesn't want power. She just wants space to exist without being watched like an intruder. Anne didn't budge. Then she should stop standing beside us. Silence fell. Camilla looked down briefly, gathering herself, then met Anne's gaze. She's part of me, Anne, and I am part of this family now. The air shifted, colder, heavier. Anne rose slowly, pushing back her chair with a soft scrape on the marble floor. I've said what I wanted to say. No goodbye. No nod. She walked out, heels clicking sharply on the floor. Camilla sat alone, shadows from the flickering fire dancing across her face. The news travelled fast, quieter than headlines, sharper than whispers. Royal aides carried it down corridors, one sentence here, another there. Princess Anne had concerns. Camilla hadn't been pleased. It did not take long before Laura Lopes heard about it, not from her mother, not from the palace, but from someone working behind the scenes, someone who had overheard just enough. They didn't tell her everything. They didn't need to. She thinks you're pretending, the aide whispered. You're acting like royalty. Laura laughed softly, but there was no joy in it. Acting like royalty, she repeated, voice low. The aide gave her a sympathetic look. You're overstepping. That night, Laura stood by her window, looking out across the London skyline. Her reflection stared back at her, quiet, invisible, but inside, something had cracked. She thought of all the events she'd attended yet never truly belonged to. The photographs where she stood just off-centre, tables missing her name, glances, cold smiles, subtle exclusions. She's not one of us. The words echoed louder than ever. This was the final straw. Laura wasn't trying to be royal. She simply wanted to be seen, respected, to exist beside her mother without being pushed aside. But now she understood. No matter how politely she smiled, how carefully she moved, how elegantly she dressed, she would never be enough. And if silence had gained her nothing, perhaps it was time to stop being quiet, because sometimes silence breaks louder than screams, and sometimes a single conversation can turn peace into war. The death stare at Kensington Palace. Kensington had never looked more dazzling. Gardens shimmered beneath soft golden lights. Inside the grand hall, crystal chandeliers scattered delicate stars across polished floors. The air buzzed with music, laughter, and the subtle click of cameras. It was one of the year's grandest galas. Press and eyes everywhere, every move calculated, every smile rehearsed. Prince William and Princess Kate greeted guests with grace, a picture of royalty. Queen Camilla glided through the room with fixed elegance, words light, smile composed. King Charles spoke with dignitaries. Princess Anne, as always, moved with quiet command, formal, distant, unshaken. Then Laura Lopes appeared. No announcement, no trumpet, no fanfare, just a soft murmur among guests, a graceful figure in ivory silk, modest, her hair tucked behind her ears, radiating quiet elegance. Yet her eyes spoke something else. No hesitation, no nerves. She had attended these events before, knew the drill. But tonight, something inside had changed. She wasn't just walking into a gala, she was walking into a battle, not with words or gestures, but with presence. The silence around her was louder than applause. Guests glanced, then looked away. Some smiles came late, some not at all. Curtsies skipped entirely. Invited, yes. Included, not really. She moved like a shadow drifting between stars. Then it happened. Turning toward the west corridor, Laura saw her, Princess Anne, composed as ever, moving past without a word, glance or nod. Cold air. Laura froze. She turned fully, meeting Anne's eyes. It wasn't rage. It didn't hurt. It was far quieter, far more dangerous. controlled, calm, a fire burning silently. Anne stopped mid-step. Slowly, she turned her head back. Across the polished floor, the two women faced each other like statues carved from different stones. Anne's eyes didn't widen, her mouth didn't move, but her stillness spoke volumes. She understood exactly what that look meant. This wasn't about tonight alone. It was about years of silence, invisible treatment, and refusing to stay that way. A single camera clicked. A royal photographer, far to the side, captured the stare, the tension, frozen in time. Neither moved first. For long, heavy seconds, it was just them, and the invisible 1,000 eyes pretending not to notice. Then Anne turned her chin slightly and walked on, wordless. Laura followed her own path, steps measured, face unreadable. But the photo had been taken, and it would travel far. The image went everywhere. Two women, one moment that changed everything. Media dubbed it the death stare. Headlines screamed Laura Lopez stares down Princess Anne at Royal Gala. Blogs dissected body language. Social media exploded. The palace remained silent. No statement, no denial. The silence only made the image louder. In that single glance, the world saw it all. A lifetime of tension, cold greetings, closed doors, finally answered by one bold, piercing stare. From that night on, nothing between them would ever be the same. The glare that shook the crown. The grand halls of the palace, usually calm, had grown uneasy. Servants moved faster, doors closed more gently. Conversations ended quickly when certain names came up. Something had shifted. Everyone felt it. Behind tall walls of royalty, the air carried whispers heavier than words. The gala photo of Laura Lopez's piercing stare toward Princess Anne went viral overnight. Inside the palace, silence was no longer safe. It was suspicious. Royal aides exchanged tense glances. Voices lowered behind half-shut doors. Was it intentional? One whispered. Did she mean to challenge Anne? Another asked. No one knew for sure, but everyone had an opinion. A footman muttered, "It wasn't just a glance." Another replied, "It was a message." That message spread like wildfire. Prince William and Princess Kate stayed distant, polite as always, careful. No smiles, no side chats, not even a nod. William respected Anne, loyal and steadfast, but Laura, his stepsister by marriage, was now a problem. King Charles felt it most keenly. He was caught between Anne, who had stood by him for decades, and his wife's daughter, who never asked for status yet seemed to stake a claim now. He spoke little, but those closest noticed his tense shoulders. He read the headlines alone, in silence. In his study, he tapped the photo on the front page of the paper, then folded it away with a long, heavy sigh. Camilla, too, was painfully aware of the damage she had hoped would fade with time. She had told the aides it had been nothing, a moment misread by the media, an unfortunate trick of timing. "They're making it bigger than it was," she murmured softly. She said quietly to a trusted aide that there had been no harm, but also no apology, not from Laura, not even a hint of regret. Laura moved on, as if nothing had happened. She continued attending public events, appearing at gallery openings and family functions, but something had shifted. Her presence no longer felt quiet, it felt bold, almost defiant, and that boldness did not go unnoticed. The press seized on it and ran. Headlines screamed across glossy covers. Camilla's daughter versus the princess. Royal palace rift grows as Laura breaks silence with her eyes. The look that started a war. Talk shows analysed the body language, dissecting every blink, every tilt of the head. Columnists wrote stories of jealousy, tradition, power. Some sympathised with Laura, the outsider pushing through glass walls. Others defended Anne, calling her a protector of the monarchy's sacred rules. But inside the palace, a different discussion had begun, one far more serious. Laura was not a working royal. She held no title, no official duties. Her name did not appear in press releases, yet now her photo was everywhere. Her name was trending. Her stare had become a headline, and that made her a problem for protocol. A meeting was called. Behind closed doors, royal advisors and senior aides sat stiffly around a long polished table. The discussion was careful, but tense. "We must address her role," one aide began. "She's not part of the working structure." "But she is the Queen's daughter," another added quietly, as if saying it too loud would provoke something dangerous. She's family, someone murmured, but not firm, and that was the line they couldn't agree on. Where did Laura stand? She was part of the Queen's heart, but not the monarchy's design. And now, the lines between personal and public were blurring fast. The palace refused to release a statement, but inside those walls, the message was clear. Laura's place was no longer a quiet question. It had become a loud, open debate, and the glare that had lasted only seconds had opened a door. No one could quietly close it again, by blood, or by law, or tradition. The air inside the king's private study was thick with silence and shadows. Heavy curtains muted the sounds of the world outside. The scent of old wood and polished leather filled the room. The fire burned low, flickering faintly as Princess Anne stood by the window, arms folded tightly across her chest. King Charles sat behind his desk, reading glasses in hand, eyes fixed on the documents before him. But he wasn't reading. He knew why she had come. She did not waste a moment. "We need to talk about Laura," Anne said sharply, turning to face him fully. Charles looked up slowly, eyes tired. "Anne, she's stepping into places she doesn't belong," he said quietly. Anne cut in, her voice controlled but cold. "It's gone too far." The king leaned back in his chair, watching her carefully, taking a slow step forward. "She's appearing at events, posing for cameras, standing beside working royals. That stare she gave me at Kensington, it wasn't just rudeness, it was a statement, one meant for everyone to see." Charles tried to soften it. "It was just a moment." "No," Anne said firmly. She began pacing slowly, her boots silent on the thick carpet. "It was a challenge. She's trying to blur the lines, stepping into something that's not hers. And if we let her, we weaken everything we stand for." Charles folded his hands on the desk, measuring his words. "She's Camilla's daughter. That makes this delicate." He stopped walking and turned fully toward her. "We all have children. That doesn't mean we hand them crowns." "She's not asking for a crown," Anne replied. "No, but she's standing like she's earned one. And if we let her continue, it tells the staff, the press, the public that the rules mean nothing anymore." Charles said nothing. Anne lowered her voice, almost a whisper. "I've spent my life protecting this family's name. Not just from scandal, but from confusion. People must know who we are and who we are not." He looked at her carefully. "She's not a threat to the family, Anne." "She is," she replied firmly, "because she's not part of the family business." A heavy silence fell between them. "I'm not being cruel," she added a little softer. "I'm being clear. There's a difference." Charles looked down at the papers again, as if they might offer a way out. "You know, I don't want conflict." "Neither do I," Anne replied, "but silence is not peace." He stood slowly, walking toward the fireplace. His back was to her, the firelight dancing across his suit. "Camilla will take it personally," he said at last. "She's the queen, and she'll understand what duty means." Charles rubbed his temples gently. The weight of the crown had never felt heavier. "What do you want me to do? Make it official?" Anne's voice was calm but firm. "Set boundaries. Make it clear she's not to appear at royal events. Not beside us. Not behind us. Not with us." The king turned around, eyes meeting his sister's. "And if that hurts Camilla," Anne stepped closer, her voice quiet but unwavering. "If Laura wants to be royal," she said, pausing for effect, "then she must play by our rules." Her eyes locked with his, unwavering, the Queen's silent tear caught in the corner of her eye. The sun had barely risen over Buckingham Palace when Queen Camilla sat alone in her private drawing room. The palace was quiet, too quiet, but her heart pounded loudly in her chest. Her hands trembled as she held a folded newspaper. The headlines whispered what royal aides had only dared to say behind closed doors. Laura, to be quietly removed from royal circles. The words struck deep, like a knife beneath her carefully arranged calm. She placed the paper on the table, fingers lingering on its edge. Outside, the garden glowed in the early morning light, but inside, a storm had taken root. They were talking about her daughter, her Laura, the little girl she had once protected from everything: press, gossip, judgment, the girl who had grown up in the shadows of a world she was never truly part of. And now, just as she had begun to stand in the light, they were trying to push her back into the dark. As a mother, Camilla felt crushed. As queen, She felt helpless. Her thoughts drifted backward to gentler days. She saw herself sitting in a quiet garden, brushing Laura's golden hair as the child played with dolls, completely unaware of the harsh world beyond the gates. Camilla remembered shielding her daughter from cameras, pulling her close during whispers, never letting her feel the cold breath of royal judgment. "I won't let them touch you," she had promised once, but promises were easier before the crown. Before the palace walls closed in that afternoon, she found King Charles in his study. He stood by the window, hands behind his back, already aware of what she had come to say. "They want her gone," Camilla said quietly. "From everything, even the small things." He turned his face fully, softness there, but also the weight of his role. "She's not being asked to leave," he began, choosing words slowly, just enough to step back. Camilla stepped closer. "You know what that means." He moved gently, placing a hand on her arm. "I cannot fight this without it becoming worse. Anne is serious. The staff are uneasy. The papers are circling." Camilla's eyes filled, but she blinked quickly. "She's not trying to be royal. She's just being present, being my daughter." "I know," Charles said, "but this place doesn't forget lines." Camilla pulled away, turning toward the fireplace. "It's always the same, isn't it? I fought so hard to be seen. Now she has to fight too." He came closer. "Camilla, please." But there were no words that could fix what was breaking inside her. Her two worlds were colliding. One was duty, and one was her child. Meanwhile, across the palace, Laura stood by her window staring out at the grey sky. She had heard the whispers. She had seen the looks. She knew Princess Anne was behind it, and she wasn't afraid. "She doesn't scare me," Laura said quietly to a trusted aide. "She's just afraid of change." The aide did not respond, but the silence was louder than any reply. Laura brushed a hand down her tailored coat. If they expected her to disappear, they were mistaken. She wouldn't back down. Not now. Not after coming this far. Not after being invisible for most of her life. But the pressure was building. The air inside the palace had shifted. Words were fewer. Smiles tighter. Even William and Kate had become distant. Camilla felt it all that night, when the palace was fast asleep. She sat at her dressing table, hair unpinned, eyes tired. She looked into the mirror, but did not see the Queen. She saw a mother. She reached for a handkerchief, pressed it to her lips, and breathed in deeply. A single tear rolled down her cheek. She did not speak, did not sob, did not call anyone. She simply sat there in silence, in sorrow, suspended in the space between a crown and a daughter, and within the walls of the palace so accustomed to secrets, holding hers gently, privately, like a fragile jewel no one could touch. When the palace door closed, the sky above London was a soft, muted grey, the kind that mirrored the sombre mood inside Clarence House, where the final decision had been made behind those ancient walls. History had turned once again, not with grand speeches nor royal trumpets, but with a quiet, cold line written into the palace records, inked and official, final, unavoidable. Laura Lopes would no longer attend official royal events in any capacity. It was not a punishment. They insisted it was merely a return to what was deemed appropriate, but for those who knew the truth, it felt like an exile. The news reached Queen Camilla first, not through headlines or reporters, but via a quiet, respectful message delivered directly to her chamber by a royal aide, one of the few truly trusted. He handed her the sealed envelope with a slight bow. She read the words in silence. Her lips tightened, her shoulders stiffened. No gasp, no tears, only stillness. She folded the letter carefully and placed it beside her teacup. The warmth of the tea had faded, but the heat in her chest had only just begun. It was happening. The thing she had feared since the whispers began, the thing she had fought quietly behind closed doors, was now official. They were pushing Laura out, and she could do nothing to stop it. Down the corridor, Laura sat in a smaller room, unaware. A royal aide entered, different from the one who had spoken to Camilla earlier. There was no softness in his voice, no room for sentiment. "I've been instructed to inform you," he said. "Moving forward, you will no longer be included in official royal functions. The family wishes to return to protocol." Laura blinked once. "Is this from the king?" The decision was collective, the aide replied, and it had been finalized. She did not argue. She did not question. She simply nodded and stood. By morning, the news had leaked. Laura's face appeared on every front page. Camilla's daughter removed from royal roll. Royal rift widens. Laura Lopez banned from public events. The Princess Royal released a careful, polished denial. No, it was not a banishment. No, there was no conflict. Only a clarification of roles. But the press had already written their version, and the public had already chosen their sides. Princess Anne said nothing. Her silence spoke louder than any quote. Days passed. Camilla returned to public duty, attending a charity gala in a soft blue gown. Her smile was gentle, words polished, but those who looked closely noticed the sadness in her eyes. Behind every handshake, a mother's ache. Behind every wave, a whisper of pain. One photographer captured a fleeting, unguarded moment as she gazed into the distance. The image quickly spread online. Thousands commented. Many recognized the palace's hidden truth. Camilla, the queen, was not okay. Laura, meanwhile, faded from view. No interviews, no statements, no last wave to the crowd. Her final public appearance had been quiet. A small art exhibition at a private gallery in Soho. She wore black and spoke little. She stayed less than an hour. No press followed her out. No headlines screamed her name. She disappeared into the London night like smoke curling away from a flame. There was no farewell, no speech, no closure. Behind the balcony, smiles and orchestrated waves. The weeks rolled quietly, like clouds drifting across a pale sky. Outside the palace gates, the storm that had once shaken the royal family began to settle. Tabloids moved on. Their headlines chased fresher scandals, newer faces, what had once been front-page news. Laura Lopez's quiet removal from royal life now rested beneath layers of fleeting stories and gossip. Yet inside the palace walls, the silence was heavy. It wasn't the peaceful kind of silence. It wrapped rooms like fog, settled on shoulders, pressed on hearts. It lived in lingering glances, in words left unsaid, in footsteps softer than before. Princess Anne remained untouched by the shift. If anything had changed within her, no one could see it. She walked with the same purposeful stride, carried herself with the same cold dignity. Her schedule was as packed as ever. Charity events, speeches, ceremonies. Wherever duty called, she answered. She wore the crown's weight with ease, making sure it never slipped. No one dared mention Laura, not in meetings, not over tea, not even in whispers. It was as though she had never been there. The young woman with strong opinions and a sharper gaze had vanished. Her name disappeared from guest lists, her face quietly removed from photographs and family portraits. Yet her absence remained palpable. Camilla felt it most. She stood beside the king in public, smiling, nodding gently to crowds, waving from balconies. Her gowns were perfect, her posture firm. But something had changed. Her eyes, once bright with soft warmth, had dimmed. They looked further away, as though she saw something no one else could. She spoke when necessary. She laughed when prompted. But behind every smile, a silence remained no one could pierce. Behind closed doors, she moved more slowly. Her voice was softer, her gaze more distant. She still performed. Her role beside Charles endured, but the weight she carried now was different. She had always known sacrifices were required, but no one tells a mother what it feels like to lose her daughter, not to death, but to a decision dressed in formality, wrapped in tradition, signed off behind layers of protocol. Charles had tried to comfort her privately. He had reached for her hand, spoken gently, but even he had limits. Even he knew the crown could not bend for sentiment. Camilla knew that too. That knowledge did not make the ache softer. She had raised Laura away from this world, away from flashing cameras, polished palaces, and royal expectations. She had shielded her from the sharp edges of monarchy for as long as she could. But Laura had stepped into the frame. She had walked into the royal light, confident, unafraid, and the light had burned her. Now the palace moved forward. From the outside, the family looked whole, perfect. Shoulder to shoulder at public events, smiles for photographers, waves to children lined along the streets. They were united, but inside the palace, everything was different. Dinners were quieter, conversations stiffer. The air between certain family members no longer flowed easily. There were cracks, not large enough to break walls, but enough to let the cold seep in. Anne said little. She did not gloat. She did not explain. She simply continued forward. head held high, words precise. The matter was closed. Others followed her lead, but Camilla could not forget. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, she would sit alone in one of the palace's quieter rooms. She wouldn't cry. She had already done that. Instead, she stared into the garden, watching the trees sway gently under the moonlight, wondering where her daughter was at that moment. Was she alone? Was she angry? Was she finally free? These questions followed Camilla everywhere, through royal meetings, state dinners, ribbon cuttings and handshakes. She could no longer speak of Laura. Not to Charles, not even to herself, because to speak her name was to open a wound. Laura's story had no ending, no farewell, no final message. She had simply gone quiet, stepping back into a private world. Her last public appearance had been small, understated, a quiet art exhibition. No reporters, no interviews, just silence. The look that shook the crown had happened in less than a second. A look, that was all. A flash of something sharp and unspoken passed from Laura's eyes to Princess Anne's in the middle of a royal engagement. Cameras flashed, guests clapped. The soft hum of ceremony filled the room. It was a death stare at the time, brushed aside by most, whispered about by few, overlooked by many. Now, everything had changed. The palace had grown quiet. Laura was gone from the royal scene. Her name vanished from guest lists, programs, and schedules. She melted into the background like early morning fog, leaving only questions and that one unforgettable moment. Camilla remembered it with perfect clarity. She had stood only steps away, performing as expected, smiling. Her daughter's face had been calm, posture flawless, but those eyes had burned with something fierce and final. Princess Anne had turned her head. Laura had not looked away. It wasn't mere defiance. It wasn't rude. It was the sum of years of standing behind velvet ropes, smiling politely, forced into silence. Years of feeling like a guest in the world her mother had married into, where traditions were tight and expectations tighter. That look had been Laura's voice, one loud enough to crack the walls of silence that had always surrounded her. In the monarchy, silence was survival, and Laura had broken it. Everything shifted after that moment. Meetings were held, rules dusted off. Laura's presence suddenly dangerous. Once accepted with quiet tolerance, she was now reconsidered. Too bold, too unpredictable, too close to the edge of something sacred. Behind closed doors, Anne had been clear. If she wants to be royal, she must play by the rules, or not at all. And just like that, the palace made its choice. Laura was out. Camilla watched it unfold. She pleaded quietly, hoped, privately cried, but there was nothing she could do. Not as queen, not as mother. The two roles clashed like thunder inside her heart. But the crown always won. The look that started it all echoed endlessly in her mind. Sleepless nights, empty afternoons, quiet royal dinners where no one dared speak her daughter's name. It had been a stare, a flicker, a frozen frame caught by a single lens. But inside the palace, it had been far more dangerous, a truth too raw for royal halls, too wild for polished floors and scripted smiles. Now everything was different. Laura had disappeared from the royal scene, tucked behind gallery walls and private invitations. Her last public appearance, the quiet art show, came and went with no speeches, no farewell. Princess Anne remained dignified, unshaken, executing her duties like always. Her silence spoke volumes. Strength unchanged. She had done what she believed right for the family, the crown, and for Camilla. Camilla endured. She stood beside the king, shoulders back, heart heavy. She had made peace with what could not be changed, but deep inside, she knew something had been lost. Not a title, not a role, a moment.